Mr. President, another important topic that we should be talking about on the Senate floor a lot more is the state of our economy. In my view, national defense, economic opportunity for Americans, these are the critical things we need to be debating in the Senate. So as I've been doing recently, I wanted to come down here and talk about the health of our economy, the importance of getting to a healthy economy. Because make no mistake, right now, we have a sick economy. We need to bring the U.S. economy, the greatest economic engine of growth the world has ever known, back to life. We need to bring people who have lost economic hope, opportunity once again. And let me be clear. Americans don't easily give up on hope. We are a country of hope, a country of dreams. Progress is in our DNA, always moving forward. But, Mr. President, Americans are starting to lose hope because they're not seeing opportunity. They're not seeing progress. They're not seeing a healthy economy. So what's going on? I'd like to provide a quote from a recent article in the Atlantic Monthly entitled "The Secret Shame of Middle-Class Americans." I would recommend this article to my colleagues. The author is talking about Americans from all spectrums who, because of the weak economy and because of no economic opportunity, are living paycheck to paycheck. Millions of Americans, he describes in this article, paycheck to paycheck. He says, quote, "It was happening to the soon to retire as well as the soon to begin. It was happening to college grads as well as high school dropouts. It was happening all across the country, including places where you might least expect to see such a problem. I knew that I wouldn't have $400 of additional income in case of an emergency. What I hadn't known," the author goes on to say, "couldn't have conceived was that so many Americans wouldn't have that kind of money, $400, available to them either. My friend and local butcher, Brian, who is one of the only men I know who talks openly about his financial struggles, once told me, if anyone says he's sailing through right now, he's lying." Unquote. Then the author goes on to make a very, very important statement. He says, in the 1950s and 60s, American economic growth democratized prosperity. Everybody had opportunity with strong economic growth. But in the 2010s, he says, we have managed to democratize financial insecurity. That's what's happening across the country. And in my opinion, Mr. President, a big part of the problem, one that is playing out in our politics right now, is the fact that those who are hurting are not being heard. They see their lives, they know the challenges. Nearly half of Americans would have trouble finding $400 in a crisis, as this article lays out. And yet, it doesn't match up with what their leaders are telling them. Let me give you an example. In a recent speech, President Obama actually said, quote, "We are better off today than we were just 7 years ago." He said that anybody who tells you differently, quote, "is not telling the truth." That's the president. Guarantee you the president's not agreeing with this article. Well, I hate to inform the president, but even former President Bill Clinton recently had this to say about the Obama economy. Quote, millions and millions and millions of people look at the pretty picture of America President Obama painted, and they can't find themselves in it, unquote. That's former President Bill Clinton on the current state of the U.S. economy. And it's hard to see why so many can't find themselves in the picture that the president has painted of our current economy. During nearly 8 years of the Obama administration, the number of Americans participating in the labor force shrank to its lowest level since 1978. What does that mean? It means Americans have just quit looking for jobs. In the last 8 years, more Americans have fallen into poverty. Family paychecks have declined, and the number of people on food stamps has skyrocketed by 40%, all during the last 8 years. The percentage of Americans who own homes, the marker of the American dream, home ownership, is down by over 5%. And let me give you another number that, although many Americans aren't familiar with, impacts them deeply. A few weeks ago, it was announced by the Commerce Department that the economy essentially stopped growing. Last quarter, we grew at 0.5% GDP growth. Gross domestic product growth. That's essentially an indicator of progress, an indicator of the health of our economy, of our country, of opportunity. It was stagnant. Didn't grow. Let me put this in perspective. In the past 200 years, American growth, Democrat, Republican presidents, doesn't matter. We've had ups and downs, but the past 200 years, real GDP growth has been about 4%, 3.7%. This is what's made our country great. This is what's fueled the engine of the middle class of America. Under this administration, the average has been an anemic 1.5% GDP growth. We have never had even 1/4 of 3% GDP growth. Now, the administration doesn't talk about that. In fact, very few do. We need to talk about it more on the U.S. Senate floor. But the American people feel it. This article describes it. They see it again and again when one of their neighbors or loved ones loses a job, or they see their paychecks stagnant for 8 years, or they see another small business in their community closing, or when they start wondering how they're going to put their children through college. They see it in the long road ahead of them that shows no promise of a brighter future because of the lack of economic opportunity. They see it, and as this article describes, they feel the sting of shame. Bottom line, Mr. President, we have had a lost decade of economic growth and opportunity in the last 10 years. And we need to get serious about this problem. We need to focus on this problem almost above any other thing. My colleagues a lot of times come down here and talk about a moral imperative. This is a moral imperative to create a healthy economy for the entire country. But we're not doing that. Now, Mr. President, what are the solutions? Well, one thing is when you ask the experts, how do you grow the economy? How can we create articles that talk about opportunity, not the shame of the middle class? One idea certainly is we have to reform a federal government that tries to overregulate every aspect of our economy, especially the small businesses. And when you ask the experts or the politicians, they all agree. A number of us had the opportunity to talk to former chairman of the Fed, Alan Greenspan, yesterday. This clearly was one of the issues that he thinks we need to ignite traditional levels of economic growth. Regulatory reform. Again, Bill Clinton, in a Newsweek article, cover article in 2011, said the number one thing we need to do is move forward on regulatory reform to get projects moving, to build this country again. And even President Obama, in his State of the Union address this year, said we have to cut red tape, we have to lessen the regulatory burden on Americans. So there seems to be widespread agreement. But it's all talk. And when we actually try to act, when we actually try to do just minimal reforms to this, which is the explosion in the growth of federal rules and regulations over the last several decades, when we try to do just a little of this, we stall. We get stymied. We get caught up in politics. Let me give you just two recent examples, Mr. President. I had a bill called the Red Tape Act, very simple bill, debated here on the Senate floor. It essentially would put a cap on federal regulations, a one-in, one-out rule. If you're a federal agency and you're going to put more regs on the U.S. economy, then you have to look at your big portfolio regulations and sunset the equivalent economic burden in terms of regs. Very simple idea. 4-page bill. The UK is doing this. Canada is doing this. And it's working. Some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle certainly thought it was a good idea, but we bring it to the floor, a simple idea that would help our economy. Party line vote goes down. And just last week, as we were debating the appropriations bill, in terms of transportation, we wanted to move forward on another simple reg idea. Real simple. If there's a bridge in your neighborhood and it's structurally deficient, by the way, the United States has 61,000 structurally deficient bridges, and you're not going to expand the bridge, you're just going to do maintenance or reconstruct it, you expedite the permitting. So it doesn't take 5 years to build a bridge or to reconstruct the bridge. Again, very simple amendment. Very common sense on regs. We were told no, the other side viewed that as a poison pill. We even heard that the White House was thinking about threatening the bill if that amendment was attached to it. Now, Mr. President, these are simple, common sense ideas that the American people fully support to keep them safe and to grow our economy. We need to grow our economy. We need to take action on the Senate floor to help grow our economy. We need to bring this sick economy back to health. But we're not doing it right now. Instead, we see articles, like I just mentioned, about middle-class Americans living paycheck to paycheck because they don't have opportunity. What we need to do, in addition to focusing on the defense of our nation and taking care of our troops, is get this anemic economy, this lost decade of economic growth that we've seen over the last 10 years, roaring again, to provide opportunity and hope for Americans. That's what we should be focused on, Mr. President. I yield the floor.